Picture this. The year is 1520. You're standing in the Grand Palace of Tenochtitlan, the most magnificent city in the Americas. Around you, jade and gold gleam in the firelight. You're 11 years old. Your name is Tecuichpo Yixcacsohitzin. You're the favorite daughter of Moctezuma, the second emperor of the Aztec Empire. You don't know it yet, but in exactly 3 years, you'll have been married 6 times. 5 of those marriages will be to Spanish conquistadors, who'll pass you between them like a breeding mare. Each one will use your body to legitimize their claim to your father's empire. This is her story, and it's worse than anything you learned in school. If you believe that the documented records of history's most forgotten voices must be heard, consider liking this video and subscribing. Your support helps us uncover the stories that colonial powers tried to erase. Let me take you back to 1520. Tenochtitlan is the largest city in the Americas. Some estimates put the population at over 200,000 people. It's built on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, connected to the mainland by massive causeways. The Spanish haven't conquered it yet. They're guests, dangerous guests. Tecuichpo, the name, means cotton flower is being raised in the women's quarters of the palace. She's being educated in the arts expected of Aztec nobility: weaving, music, religious rituals, herbal medicine. She's learning Nahuatl poetry and the complex calendar systems. She's learning how to be an Aztec noblewoman. According to Spanish chronicler Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who actually met her, Tecuichpo was considered exceptionally beautiful even by the standards of the Aztec court, where physical beauty was cultivated as a form of art. She had the characteristic features prized in Aztec culture: a sloping forehead, achieved through cranial shaping in infancy, filed teeth inlaid with jade, elaborate hairstyles that took hours to construct. She's 11 years old when her world begins to collapse. Her father, Moctezuma, is being held captive by Hernan Cortés in his own palace. The Spanish are demanding gold. More gold, always more gold. The tension is building toward an explosion that will shatter an empire. Then comes the massacre, May 22nd, 1520. During a religious festival, Spanish forces under Pedro de Alvarado attack unarmed Aztec nobles in the temple precinct. The exact death toll varies by source, but most historians estimate between 600 and 1,000 Aztec nobility were slaughtered in a matter of hours. Tecuichpo hears the screams from the palace. A week later, her father is dead. The Spanish claim the Aztec people stoned him when he tried to calm them. Aztec accounts say the Spanish murdered him when he was no longer useful. We'll never know for certain. What we know is that on June 29, 1520, Moctezuma II died in Spanish custody. Tecuichpo is now an orphan. She's 11 years old. She's also the last legitimate heir to the Aztec throne. Think about what that means in the context of Spanish conquest strategy. The Spanish aren't just after gold. They're after legitimacy. They need to transform naked military conquest into something that looks like legitimate succession. And there's one extremely effective way to do that in a hereditary empire: marriage. Here's where the systematic horror begins. First, the Aztec nobility tries to salvage something. Tecuichpo is quickly married to her uncle, Cuitlahuac, who becomes the new emperor. This is a traditional Aztec practice marriage within the royal family to consolidate bloodlines and power. Cuitlahuac lasts exactly 80 days as emperor. In December 1520, he dies of smallpox, one of the European diseases that are killing more Aztecs than Spanish swords ever will. The epidemic is raging through Tenochtitlan. Bodies are piling up in the streets. The city that was clean enough to amaze the Spanish is drowning in corpses. Tecuichpo is 11 years old and already a widow. She's immediately married to Cuauhtemoc, the new emperor. He's young, in his early 20s. He's also the last man who'll marry her by Aztec law rather than Spanish decree. He's the last emperor of the Aztec Empire. For 2 years, Cuauhtemoc resists. He's one of the most effective military commanders in Aztec history. He transforms Tenochtitlan into a fortress. He coordinates resistance across the valley. He adapts Aztec tactics to counter Spanish cavalry and cannon. But he's fighting European diseases as much as European soldiers. August 13th, 1521. After a siege lasting 75 days, Tenochtitlan falls. The Spanish and their indigenous allies breach the final defenses. The city that had stood for 2 centuries is burning. The canals are choked with bodies. Spanish chroniclers describe the smell as unbearable even for men hardened by years of warfare. Cuauhtémoc is captured. Cortés has him tortured, demanding the location of hidden gold. They burn his feet with hot oil. The accounts describe how Cuauhtémoc endured the torture in silence, even chastising another captured noble who was screaming in pain. They'll keep him alive for 4 more years, parading him around as a symbol of Spanish victory. In 1525, during Cortés's expedition to Honduras, they'll hang him on a flimsy accusation of conspiracy. Tecuichpo is 13 years old and widowed for the 2nd time. Now comes the part that history textbooks skip over. The Spanish immediately recognize what Tecuichpo represents. She's not just the daughter of Moctezuma. She's the widow of the last 2 emperors. In Aztec law, marriage to her carries tremendous legitimacy. Whoever marries her can claim a hereditary right to the empire through his wife. She's the most valuable piece of property in New Spain. Here's what makes this especially sinister. The Spanish don't just see her as a path to legitimacy. They see her as a symbol to be broken. Every Spanish man who possesses her is demonstrating Spanish dominance over Aztec nobility. She's a living statement that the conquerors own everything the conquered once held sacred, including their princesses. Think about the calculated cruelty of this approach. Hernán Cortés, the man who destroyed her world, personally arranges her first Spanish marriage. In 1526, he gives her to one of his captains, Alonso de Grado. Not a marriage negotiated between families. Not even a marriage she consented to in any meaningful sense. She's given, like property, like one of the gold artifacts the Spanish are melting down and shipping to Spain. Cortés's secretary, Francisco López de Gomara, records this transaction in the same matter-of-fact tone he uses to describe the distribution of encomiendas and land grants. Doña Isabel Moctezuma. They've baptized her now, given her a Christian name that erases Tecuichpo is granted to Alonso de Grado, along with several encomiendas in Tacuba. She's 15 years old. Alonso de Grado lasts about a year before dying of disease. The exact cause isn't recorded. Disease is so common among the Spanish in these early years that deaths often go unexplained. Dysentery, typhus, yellow fever. The list is long. Doña Isabel is 16 and widowed for the 3rd time. She's immediately passed to Pedro Gallego de Andrade, another conquistador. Again, there's no negotiation. The Spanish crown and Cortés are treating her as a resource to be allocated. The marriage lasts approximately 1 year before Pedro also dies. She's 17 and widowed for the 4th time. Now, here's where the truly disturbing pattern becomes undeniable. The Spanish aren't just using these marriages for legitimacy. They're using them to redistribute wealth. Each time Doña Isabel is widowed, her encomiendas, the grants of indigenous labor and tribute that come with her as part of her inheritance, revert to Spanish control. Then, she's married to another conquistador, and those encomiendas are reassigned. She's not just being passed between men. She's a mechanism for circulating indigenous wealth among Spanish conquerors. In 1528, she's married to Juan Cano de Saavedra, a Spanish conquistador from Extremadura. This marriage, unlike the others, will last. Not because it's based on anything resembling consent or affection, but because Juan Cano lives long enough to establish himself and father children with her. She's 18 years old. She's been married 6 times. She's been widowed 4 times. She's been baptized, renamed, and transformed from Aztec princess to Spanish property. Think about what this does psychologically. Think about what this does psychologically. Every man who's married her according to Aztec custom, her uncle Cuitláhuac, her cousin Cuauhtémoc is dead. Her father is dead. Her brothers are dead. Everyone who represented the world she was raised for is gone. The language she was educated in, Nahuatl, is being suppressed. The religion she was trained in is being violently eradicated. The Spanish are building Mexico City directly on top of Tenochtitlan, using stones from demolished temples. She can watch her childhood home being torn down and rebuilt as a Spanish colonial capital. And she's married to one of the men who did it. Here's what we know about her life with Juan Cano from legal documents and church records. They have 5 children together. The records list their names: Juan, Pedro, Gonzalo, Isabel, and Catalina. These children are among the first generation of mestizos, mixed Spanish and indigenous heritage in colonial Mexico. They're raised as Spanish nobility, educated in Spanish customs, speaking Spanish as their first language. Doña Isabel fights for their inheritance in Spanish courts. This is where the historical record becomes more detailed, because legal disputes generate documentation. In 1526, the Spanish crown granted Doña Isabel the encomienda of Tacuba as her inheritance from Moctezuma. This was one of the most valuable encomiendas in New Spain, encompassing vast territories and thousands of indigenous tributaries. But the Spanish colonial system is designed to dispossess indigenous people, even noble ones. Colonial officials repeatedly try to reduce her holdings. They challenge her claims. They impose new taxes and restrictions. They argue that as a woman, she can't hold such extensive properties. They argue that, as an indigenous person, even a baptized one, she doesn't deserve such wealth. Doña Isabel spends decades fighting these challenges. The legal records show a woman fluent in Spanish legal language, skilled at navigating colonial bureaucracy, persistent in defending her family's rights. She files petition after petition. She appeals to the crown. She cites precedent and law. She's learned to fight her battles in Spanish courts because all other battlefields are closed. In 1550, she writes a letter directly to King Charles V of Spain. The letter survives in the Archive of the Indies in Seville. In it, she details her lineage, her marriages, her children's needs. She reminds the king that she is the daughter of Moctezuma, that her inheritance is by right, that her children are descendants of both Spanish conquistadors and Aztec emperors. She signs it Doña Isabel Moctezuma, not Tecuchpo. That name is buried, but not Moctezuma. She won't let them take that. Here's what haunts me about her story. We have extensive legal documentation of Doña Isabel fighting for property rights, inheritance claims, encomienda grants. We have church records of her children's baptisms, marriages, deaths. We have her correspondence with Spanish officials. What we don't have is her voice. We don't have a single document where she describes what it felt like to be 11 years old, watching the Spanish massacre Aztec nobles in the temple. We don't have her account of her father's death. We don't have her description of what it was like to be married 6 times before age 18. We don't have her words about what she felt, watching Mexico City rise from the ruins of Tenochtitlan. The Spanish documentation treats her as a legal entity, a property holder, a mother of Spanish citizens, never as a person who lived through the complete destruction of her world. Think about what that silence represents. The Spanish conquest of Mexico produced extensive documentation. Cortés wrote detailed letters to the king. Bernal Díaz del Castillo wrote a massive, first-hand chronicle. Franciscan friars recorded indigenous customs. Spanish lawyers documented every land grant and encomienda. But the inner life of an Aztec princess who became Spanish property, that wasn't worth recording. By the 1550s, Doña Isabel is one of the wealthiest women in New Spain on paper. The encomienda of Tacuba is still legally hers. She lives in a substantial house in Mexico City. Her children are marrying into Spanish colonial families. Her descendants will become part of the Mexican nobility that persists into the 19th century. She survived by adapting completely to Spanish colonial society. She dies sometime around 1551-551. The exact date isn't recorded, which tells you something about how the Spanish valued indigenous lives, even when those lives belonged to nobility. We have precise records of Spanish conquistadors' deaths, down to the day and hour. Doña Isabel Moctezuma, daughter of emperors, gets an approximate year. She was approximately 41 years old. She's buried in a church in Mexico City, not in Tenochtitlan, because Tenochtitlan doesn't exist anymore. Her grave marker identifies her as Doña Isabel de Moctezuma, wife of Juan Cano, mother of 5 Spanish children. No mention that she was Tecuichpo, Yix Caxochitzin, cotton flower, favorite daughter of Moctezuma II. Here's the thing that should keep you awake at night. Doña Isabel wasn't unique. The Spanish employed this exact strategy across their colonial empire. Identify indigenous noblewomen, baptize them, marry them to Spanish conquistadors. Use those marriages to legitimize Spanish control while systematically dispossessing indigenous people of their land and power. In Peru, they did it to the daughters of Inca emperors. In the Philippines, to the daughters of local datus. Wherever the Spanish conquered, they identified women whose bodies could be used to transform naked conquest into something that looked like legitimate succession. The pattern was systematic. The strategy was calculated. The horror was bureaucratic, and it worked. By the time Doña Isabel's grandchildren were adults, they thought of themselves as Spanish. They spoke Spanish. They spoke Spanish. They practiced Catholicism. They owned encomiendas worked by indigenous laborers. They were loyal subjects of the Spanish crown. The conquest was complete. Not just military conquest, but cultural annihilation. And it happened one forced marriage at a time. What happened to Doña Isabel's inheritance? The encomienda of Tacuba that she fought so hard to preserve for her children. By the late 16th century, it was being systematically reduced by Spanish colonial administrators. By the 17th century, most of it had been absorbed into the general colonial land system. By the 18th century, her descendants held only a fraction of what had been Moctezuma's empire. By the 19th century, when Mexico gained independence, the entire encomienda system was abolished. The wealth of the Aztec empire that Doña Isabel represented had been completely transferred to Spanish and then Mexican colonial elites. The systematic dispossession that began with her forced marriages had reached its logical conclusion. Nothing remained but her name in historical documents. If this moment in history doesn't move you to learn more, you might be missing the lesson our ancestors died to teach. Here's what we can learn from Doña Isabel's story. Colonialism isn't just about military conquest. It's about systematic cultural destruction carried out through bureaucratic means. Forced marriages, baptisms, legal dispossession, cultural erasure. These are the mechanisms that make conquest permanent. And they're all documented. The Spanish kept meticulous records. They wrote down every encomienda grant, every baptism, every land transfer. They documented the machinery of cultural annihilation with the same precision they used to record gold shipments. What they didn't document was the human cost. We'll never know what Tecuichpo felt, watching her world burn. We'll never know what Doña Isabel thought, raising Spanish children while living on top of her father's demolished palace. We'll never know whether she taught her children any Nahuatl words, any Aztec prayers, any memories of what had been lost. The Spanish didn't think those things were worth recording, but the pattern they created: identify indigenous noblewomen, marry them to colonizers, use their bodies to legitimize conquest, then dispossess their descendants. That pattern echoes across centuries. You can see it in European colonialism across the Americas, Africa, and Asia. You can see it in the forced assimilation policies of the 19th and 20th centuries. The strategy that destroyed Tecuichpo's world became a blueprint. Stand in Mexico City today. The Metropolitan Cathedral sits on the exact site of the Templo Mayor, the great temple of Tenochtitlan. You can see excavated Aztec stones in the cathedral's foundation. They literally built the church from the ruins of the temple. That's a metaphor for what happened to Doña Isabel. They built colonial society on top of her indigenous identity. They used her noble blood to legitimize Spanish rule. then erased everything she represented. They kept the inheritance while destroying the culture that created it, and they documented every step with bureaucratic precision. The question isn't whether colonialism was evil. That's obvious. The question is how many other Doña Isabels are buried in historical archives, their voices silenced, their trauma unrecorded, their forced transformations treated as simple legal transactions. How many other daughters of conquered peoples were passed between colonizers like property, their bodies used to legitimize the destruction of their worlds? And why did it take us until the 21st century to start asking these questions? If you believe these silenced voices deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're going to keep uncovering the colonial histories they tried to bury. Drop a comment with your thoughts and I'll see you in the next investigation.